and retired. A very warm welcome to World 360. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Now, Britain is staring at yet another political crisis, while Russian President Putin is making attempts to intensify his grip over parts of Ukraine. We'll talk about all of that at length, but first up are the headlines. Britain is set to have a fifth Prime Minister in just 6 years as Liz Truss quits, but Britain's economic and political turmoil persists. Rishi Sunak crosses minimum nomination threshold. China's Communist Party Congress wraps up granting an unprecedented third term to Xi Jinping, putting him to power for life. The new Central Committee of around 200 senior party officials is elected. And in an attempt to tighten his grip over annexed regions of Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin declares martial law. This as Russia intensifies its missile and drone attacks on Ukraine. Now, the political crisis in the United Kingdom remains our top focus. Liz Truss resigned as Prime Minister of the UK earlier this week after furore over her economic tax cut. And now the race for 10 Downing Street is back on. Indian origin former Chancellor Rishi Sunak has surpassed 100 nominations. Why is this important? Now, each candidate first needs 100 Conservative MP backers to be elected. Penny Moron, the leader of the House of Commons, has filed her candidature. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is back in the UK after holidaying as well. Many are saying he may return as the nation's leader, but remember, multiple scandals, mainly Partygate and the sexual assault allegations against this former and his former chief whip, Chris Pincher, have already cast a large shadow over him. For more details and a sense of perspective, let's quickly go across to my colleague Sanjay Suri, who's joining us live from London. Sanjay, the first question that comes to mind is, now that Rishi Sunak has crossed the minimum nomination threshold, what are the hopes for Sunak?
Well, it is looking good for Rishi Sunak. It's never looked better. He's never looked closer to moving into 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister than he does now. And support for him appears to be increasing by the hour. He's the first to have crossed that 100 threshold and done so very comfortably. There was a period early on when he was on a par with Boris Johnson. They were about the same, but since then, support for Rishi Sunak has been surging rapidly ahead of that for Boris Johnson. One reason for that, the primary reason for that, is a campaign against Boris Johnson underway. And there is a warning to many MPs that if Boris Johnson were to be elected, he could then be removed from office because there's a Privileges Committee inquiry pending against him. And if the Conservative Party has yet again to go into an election, they will look very, very much more absurd than they do after all this topsy-turvy that we've seen. But the critical point is here in Parliament. If Boris Johnson still manages to get 100 nominations, then on it will be a contest among party members, and there Boris Johnson would have an advantage. So the best bet for Rishi Sunak and the campaign for Rishi Sunak seeks to limit that support for Boris Johnson among MPs to less than 100.
Sanjay, the fact that actually stands out right now is that the UK will have 5 prime ministers in just 6 years. What's going wrong with the UK's politics, and how has this impacted UK's economy, which is still recovering from the aftermath of a pandemic?
You're quite right. In fact, we are forgetting a time when Britain was not in the process of a prime ministerial election in the Conservative Party or preparing to have one. Really, it's been a long time since it's been normal times, and all of Britain has been paying the price for this. Look at just the last round, and that messy last round with Liz Truss. She took on a policy, she made promises, she said she would undo what was, she began to do it, then she had to undo what she undid and do it piecemeal and then wholesale. This has been very damaging. We saw the turmoil in the markets, and this itself comes after the differences between former Chancellor, former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson over economic policy. Rishi Sunak certainly cited that as a reason for leaving. They were not agreed on tax cuts. So the government was in limbo. And then you go back, as you say, all these 6 years, go back to 2016, Brexit, the brave new breakaway, but not as successful as the rhetoric would suggest.
Right. Many thanks to you, Sanjay Suri, for bringing in all the latest details on UK politics. But also, let's try and get in a sense of perspective, a political perspective on what this means for Britain's politics. And for that, I'm joined in by Lord Meghnad Desai, who's the member House of Lords, and he's joining us live from London. Many thanks to you, Lord Meghnad Desai, for joining us. Now, what a turn of events. Liz Truss, barely a month and a half in office, the shortest serving Prime Minister of Britain, has now quit under rather infamous circumstances. What do you make of it? What's gone wrong?
Well, I predicted two things. In early August, I predicted that if she gets in and does what she's planning to do, the pound will collapse. And last week, I wrote a blog where jointly with somebody else, where we said that Liz Truss would be the shortest living prime minister, shortest sort of an existing prime minister. And that has also come out true. I think basically what she wanted to do was slightly daft, but she did too soon. She didn't prepare the people for it, and her Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, went too far in abolishing the upper limit of income tax altogether. And I think that is sort of not a bad policy, but too quickly done, and therefore she has paid the price for it. And I think the Conservative Party is very badly divided, although they have a large majority. They will have to sort out their own problem.
Right. Lord Desai, who do you think is now the front runner to become the next Prime Minister? Do you think Rishi Sunak stands a chance?
Well, I know every channel in India wants Rishi Sunak to be Prime Minister. I don't think he will be Prime Minister for the very simple reason that, and I've said that before when the competition was going on, that it has come too soon in Rishi Sunak's career. He has not yet been enough in politics to know how to be a politician. He's an expert. He's kind of a technical expert. And he was a very good Chancellor of the Exchequer, without a doubt. But, in British politics, you never pretend to know everything. There is a secret to being in British politics. People like Harold Wilson and Harold Macmillan always had this style of being slightly hazy, slightly fuzzy, slightly forgetful person. Of course, they were not. They were very smart people. But the people empathize with them because they say, oh, he's just one of us. And Rishi doesn't actually appear like one of us. He appears like he's a specialist, he's a technical man, he's very good and so on. He's more like Superman rather than an ordinary person. So I think he will have to pass a bit more time before he's Prime Minister. Elections can't be held before 2024. We have a law here called Fixed Term Parliament Act, which says that no Prime Minister can call an election in mid-term.
Right.
So we will have to wait till 2024 to have election.
Right, Lord Desai, that was a very interesting description of Rishi Sunak. Having said that, do you think that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson may make an entry through the back doors?
There is a whole view going on in opinion polls. There are a lot of people who want Boris Johnson back. I think that would be the best solution. But I think there may be some ridicule that why did you let him go when he now Boris is a real professional, and he would be very good. But I think he always used to say that he can't afford to be Prime Minister, salary is not big enough, etc.
Right. Many thanks to you, Lord Desai, for joining us on World 360. And with that, we quickly shift our attention over to the Ukraine war. Earlier this week, Russia's President Vladimir Putin declared martial law in 4 regions of Ukraine, namely Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and even Kherson, that Moscow had illegally annexed earlier. With the announcement of martial law, Putin said that more emergency powers will be given to the heads of all regions of Russia. Meanwhile, the United States has claimed that Russia is using Iranian-made kamikaze drones to strike Ukraine, but Iran has denied that it supplied Russia with drones for use in Ukraine. The Kremlin has also denied using Iranian weapons. Russian strikes have also reportedly hit energy facilities in western Ukraine, causing power outages. Now, let's also try and get in the latest from ground zero. And for that, I'm joined in by CNN's Nick Robertson, who's joining us live from Kiev. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us. Now, is Putin's imposition of the martial law an indication of the increasing pressure being faced by Russia's military?
It's a real indication that Putin fears that he is losing control. The fact that he wants to increase security controls is not a step he would take if he felt at ease about the situation, if he thinks that he had the situation on the ground under control. Not just the martial law here in Ukraine, but writ large across Russia. Tighter security in the regions close to the border. And again, giving regional authorities all the way across Russia stronger powers on security. That is not a decision by somebody who feels that he has the population on side. And the evidence that's being presented by the population in Russia and here in Ukraine to Putin is that his war is being rejected by all those hundreds of thousands of Russians who fled for the border rather than be conscripted into the military to go fight in Ukraine. The martial law here in Ukraine rejected by the government of Ukraine. They say it's null and void and that it has no authority over anyone here. But of course, the military in the Russian occupied and controlled areas of the illegally annexed part of Ukraine, the civilians there, the Ukrainian civilians, they're under this tough new law. And the hazards of disobeying it, the penalties could be severe.
All right. Nick, could you tell us more about Iran's kamikaze drones being used by Russia to attack Ukraine? Is this the future of warfare? And how is Ukraine's civilian population adapting to the challenge presented by the drone attacks?
This war in Ukraine really shows how the use of drones is going to affect wars going forward until something changes. Drones are dominating the battlefield in as much as they can spy over the horizon. They give artillery more accurate information. They make it more dangerous for troops in the field. But Iran's new drones here take the war into a significantly more dangerous territory for the civilians of Ukraine, because these drones are being used by Russia to supplement and augment the fact that it's running out of the more high precision, faster flying cruise missiles which have been targeting the cities. The way that Putin is using these Iranian-made drones now is to target the energy infrastructure in the cities. And they change the nature of the war because he has more of them and they are cheap to use. The Ukrainians are getting better at shooting down these Iranian-made drones because drones, unlike cruise missiles, fly slower. They fly at a lower altitude. They are audible and can be heard, so they are easier to shoot down. But the number of them that can be launched is what concerns Ukrainians. And some of those Iranian drones are getting through. And this is why Ukraine is calling for greater international action to prevent Iran from supplying Russia with these drones.
All right. Many thanks to you, Nick, for bringing in all those details and for sharing your precious insights with us. And with that, we shift our attention over to the UN and China. Earlier this week, China blocked the blacklisting of 2611 mastermind Hafiz Saeed's son, Hafiz Talha Saeed. He's also a key leader of the dreaded terrorist group Lashkar-e-Taiba. The proposal to blacklist him was put forth by India and the United States. It was a joint proposal, and China's block was the second in a span of just 2 days, because a day before that, China had blocked a proposal to brand Lashkar-e-Taiba's leader, Shahid Mahmood, as a global terrorist. Now remember, this is the 5th time in the last 4 months that China has blocked efforts to blacklist Pakistan-based terrorists. Let's also try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of why China is doing that. And for that, I'm joined in by Mr. Vijay Nambiar, who's a former diplomat, also the former ambassador to China. Mr. Nambiar, thank you so much for joining us on our show. Now, China has repeatedly blocked India and the United States' anti-terrorism proposals at UNSC. Is China being the global protector of terrorism, and why so?
If I wouldn't say that China is a protector of international terrorism, but certainly by the action it has taken, it has not added to its image and respectability or even its credibility with regard to its commitment to fight international terrorism. Now, clearly, the decision that it has taken is guided by its political relations, China's political relationship with Pakistan, and its efforts to get Pakistan off the grey list of the FATF. Now, at the same time, by doing the kind of actions it has done recently in respect of Shahid Mahmood, in respect of the earlier months, in respect of Sajid Mir and the other two, now it is clear that these actions are affecting its credibility in terms of fighting international terrorism.
Indeed, it is proving to be a major challenge for the international community, not just India. Having said that, Mr. Nambiar, China had swiftly convened a UNSC meet on Kashmir soon after the abrogation of Article 370 in the year 2019. Was India's recent abstention on Xinjiang vote a mistake?
No, you're talking of the informal meeting of the Security Council, which took place immediately after the abrogation of 370 by India in 2019.
Right.
And of course, the kind of successive ways in which they have been trying to bring about consideration of the Jammu and Kashmir issue, one forum or the other, but whether formal or informal. It is clear that this is an action where I think it has very little credibility again today. The United Nations has accepted that after Simla, this is something to be discussed bilaterally between India and Pakistan. But at the same time, again, the use of this, the veto which China has used, as well as the continuation of the discussion in informal, shows that it is using double standards.
All right, many thanks to you, Mr. Nambiar, for sharing your precious perspective with us. And staying with China, the 20th Communist Party Congress has ended in Beijing. It's undebated that Xi Jinping is returning as president of the nation for a record third time. During the 7 days of closed-door meetings with top officials, China's ruling party approved a sweeping reshuffle that saw a number of top officials, including Premier Li Keqiang, step down. Now, Li Keqiang was the second most powerful official after Xi Jinping, and this development significantly tilts the balance of power in Xi Jinping's favor. A new central committee of around 200 senior party officials has also been elected. Looking at the composition of this committee, it is clear that retirement at 68 years of age, the norm, has not been followed, with 72-year-old PLA General Zhang Yuxia and current Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who has just turned 69, is now in the committee. Also, in a dramatic development, former President Hu Jintao was escorted out of the closing ceremony without any official explanation. And so what do these changes in the CCP mean for China and for Xi Jinping's leadership? Let's try and get in a sense of perspective. And for that, I'm joined in by Mr. Ainar Tangen, who's a political affairs expert and is joining us live from Hong Kong. Many thanks to you, Ainar. Now, the 20th National Congress is expected to change China's top leadership. What is the new composition of the CCP's 20th Politburo and the PBSA?
Well, no one actually knows what the composition will be. We will know tomorrow when they walk on stage. The order in which they come in will tell you which spots they will be filling. And at this juncture, people are, speculating on who will be in there, whether it will be 7 people walking on stage or perhaps 9. Obviously, China needs to develop its next leadership. Xi Jinping will have a third term. But he's already made it very clear in his speech that he intends to try to put people in place who can meet the goals that the party has set for itself, especially by 2049.
Right. Einar, the meet has happened during a very critical time for China. What are the challenges ahead for Xi Jinping amid rising opposition and an economic crisis which has been accelerated by President Xi's zero COVID policy?
A zero COVID policy is something very difficult. Obviously, China would like to open up a couple of problems. One, they want to make sure that everybody, or at least 60% of the population, I believe that's the number, has had a shot within the last 6 months. So that means that they'll have to be on a much more intensive drive to get people to either take the original vaccines or get a booster. The second issue is long COVID. At a time when there are new variants out there, long COVID has popped up as very, very disturbing. 3% of the people who have had it have had COVID, have contracted long COVID, and they still have symptoms after 1 year. 78% get it initially, but their symptoms go away within that year. This is a real problem because if you start moving people from the positive side of the economic equation where they're able to work to the negative side where they are not able to work and they're in essence a burden on society, you're talking about a massive number of people, especially when it's 3% of 1.4 billion people. Already in Europe, they have 17 million people who've been affected by this. The long-term situation is unknown with long-term COVID.
Right.
And in the U.S., they estimate already that there have been 500,000 people removed from the workforce because of long COVID. So China's watching this very, very carefully along with these new variants to make sure that when they do open up, it's not at the cost of their people.
All right. Einar, to resolutely oppose and contain Taiwan's independence is also being enshrined in the party's constitution recently. What will this resolution mean for Taiwan's independence?
As a constitutional matter, Taiwan has always been written into the Constitution as part of one China. That was accepted by the United States and the rest of the world through the UN. There were resolutions there. There were 3 communiques with the United States. It made it very clear there's only one China and that the situation between China and Taiwan would be resolved by the Chinese side, not by outside interference. It was agreed that armaments to Taiwan would not be of an offensive nature. They would simply be to repair existing. Obviously, the U.S. has exceeded that, and that has, really threatened the whole relationship between these two, one growing and one existing power. So at this time, Taiwan remains a point where it appears the U.S. is trying to leverage it, much like Ukraine.
Right. Many thanks to you, Einar, for bringing in all those details and for sharing your precious insights. And with that, it's time to slip into a quick break. But don't go anywhere because we'll be back with the latest on France protests. Stay with us at World 360.